I'm going to break down the 3 pillars of entrepreneurial success in a way that hit me like a ton of bricks last week when we were at our quarterly coaching event with about 300 of our company's clients. And I learned amazing lessons about the pain points that business owners have when it comes to scaling a company. And these 3 pain points also align perfectly with the 3 pillars of success. They're also the 3 pain points of success, or the 3 pain points of failure, if you put it that way. Here are the 3 pillars. Welcome to another episode of the Bill Hauser podcast, and today we are going to talk about the 3 pillars of entrepreneurial success. How do you define success as an entrepreneur, as a business owner? These 3 pillars across the thousands of business owners I've helped grow and achieve record-breaking profit growth, revenue growth, and free time growth. Kind of just gave it away. I'm going to break down the 3 pillars of entrepreneurial success in a way that hit me like a ton of bricks last week when we were at our quarterly coaching event with about 300 of our company's clients. Some of the business owners at this event were doing just $250,000 a year. Others were doing tens of millions of dollars a year. And I, for the first time, did this VIP experience where I got to meet one-on-one with 10 of these entrepreneurs and different sizes of business owners that I got to meet with one-on-one, which is something I have not done in years. I do no one-on-ones. I'm not involved in my company's sales process at all. I'm not involved in our client delivery process at all. So I haven't met one-on-one at the rate that I did at this past boot camp in Chicago in quite some time, and I learned amazing lessons about the pain points that business owners have when it comes to scaling a company. And these 3 pain points also align perfectly with the 3 pillars of success. They're also the 3 pain points of success, or the 3 pain points of failure, if you put it that way. Here are the 3 pillars, and the key isn't the 3 pillars in so much as it's the relationship between the pillars, right? Now, the 3 pillars are growth, profit, and freedom. Okay, so let's break this down. When you become a business owner, when you become an entrepreneur, typically you do it because you want money, right? You need money in some cases. Let's say you were fired from a job and that caused you to start your own business, or you wanted more money and or you wanted more freedom. You wanted to be able to work for yourself, right? These are the 2 main reasons that people start businesses is, they need more money or they need more autonomy of some sorts, right? But the fact of the matter is a very small percentage of businesses actually ever get growth, profit, and freedom. What typically happens is you only get one of these things, right? If you look at 90% of entrepreneurs, 90% of them only get one of these 3 things, meaning you may figure out growth, right? And that may come naturally to you. I know that was a symptom for me in the beginning of my business is I understood growth. We went from 0 to multiple 8 figures in just a handful of years. And it was pretty easy for me to do that because that was my default mode, right? But in the process of achieving all this growth, I plummeted my profits and I plummeted my personal free time, and I was working way too many hours a day. Some other people, they never figure out really the rapid growth equation and the scaling side of growing a business, right? But they do figure out profits, right? Now, there's plenty of entrepreneurs that run high profit businesses, high profit percent businesses, I should say, not actually high intrinsic profits. We'll call this a business that makes $500,000 a year in profits or $250,000 a year in profits, right? For most small business owners, that's pretty good, for sole proprietors and small businesses to make $250,000 to $500,000 a year, right? But typically what you see in these small businesses is the profits that they make are extremely owner dependent, meaning if the owner was not working 12 to 16 hours a day, these profits would not exist, right? So that person who figured out how to run a profitable business, they didn't figure out growth, right? Because growth requires you to replace yourself, and they didn't figure out freedom. And, obviously freedom comes down to also replacing yourself. So you're not the person doing all the work in your business and therefore having no freedom. And the third category I've noticed is the law firm owner or business owner who cracks the freedom code, meaning they do delegate well. They give up tasks very easily. They have hired a team to replace themselves, right? Et cetera, et cetera. This type of business owner is the person who figured out how to eject themselves from the day-to-day of their business, but they typically do so at lower profits and at a lower growth rate, right? So you have these trade-offs, right? To conquer one of these three pillars of success is kind of like being an amateur entrepreneur, right? If you're an amateur entrepreneur, you can probably figure out one of these three. Now, most entrepreneurs never even graduate to the amateur level. Most entrepreneurs stay beginner, and they actually never conquer any of these three, which would basically mean very limited growth, very limited profits, very limited freedom, right? And somebody who can't conquer any of the three, they are going to be labeled, in my viewpoint, as a beginner or even necessarily a failure. Let's call it what it is, right? I mean, in school, if you get an F, you failed, right? So in entrepreneurship, that would be a failure if you couldn't figure out growth, profit, or freedom at all, right? So no growth, no profit, no freedom, beginner. Figure out one of the three, that puts you into the amateur category. Figure out two of the three, that puts you in the semi-pro category, which is a step below pro. And figure out all three, that means you're a professional, right? That means you are an absolute expert, right? Now, let's talk about why these trade-offs happen. Well, what we want is all three of them. We want a predictable growth model so we can control when our business grows. We want a predictable profit model so that our company profits without our time involvement, and we want a predictable freedom model so that the business runs itself without our involvement. We want all three of these things. So if we take a step back from what are all three of these things, well, all three of these are reflections of your focus and your skills as the owner of your business, right? So if you are not skilled in being the director of your law firm's profits, your personal freedom, and your law firm's growth, then you will be disciplined by the marketplace and you will not achieve any of these three areas, right? If you are skilled and focused on these three areas, you will achieve better results, right? So the first step in figuring out this equation is to make a commitment that you are going to be your firm's, your business's director of profit, growth, and freedom. Meaning this is actually a responsibility of you, the owner of your business, right? So this is my responsibility. If my business is not growing, that's on me. If my business is not profiting, that's on me. And if I am not having more free time and more being ejected from the day-to-day of the business more and more and more, then that's on me, right? So I take responsibility for it. It's part of my job role to replace myself from the business to get higher profits and to get higher growth. It's part of the job role. And therefore, every unit of time I don't focus on these three areas, I am not working on my business. I'm working in my business. Okay, so let's establish that first. The next thing I want to talk through is the importance of understanding what one of these three is your biggest problem right now, right? And there's really a little bit of introspection that needs to happen on your behalf to identify which of these three is the top problem. There's a book by Gary Keller on the one thing. I love this book because it shows the power of focus, the power of knowing what your one thing is, right? And one things can change over time. But right now, if you're working 12 to 16 hour days, chances are your one thing is freedom. That's what you need to solve. You need to solve ejecting yourself from the day-to-day of the business, right? Now, what you typically notice in businesses where the owner is working 12 to 16 hours a day is typically they're going to be a little bit higher profit because the main talent of the business, the owner, is working themselves to the bone, and that's what we call owner-dependent profit, right? So if you're working 12, 16 hours a day, you've got a freedom problem, and that may be your one thing. Let's say that you're actually delegating well, you've hired people around you to replace yourself in your business, but you're not profiting anything. Well, profit is the lifeblood of your business. If you are losing more money than you're making, right, then you're going to go out of business over time, right? So it is mission critical that if your one thing is profits, that you solve it as rapidly as humanly possible, right? And let's say you're profiting well, and or your freedom is okay, but your firm or business isn't growing, right? So think about that as growth is your number one problem, because growth is death in today's inflation-rich economy, in a world where A players want to join growing organizations, right? You will never attract A players to your business if your business is not going places. If your business is not growing, it is not going places. Therefore, it's no surprise that great people don't want to join a company that's going nowhere, right? So if you don't figure out growth, A, you're not going to attract the best people to work on your team. B, you're not going to increase your financial resources to be able to hire that upper echelon of executive leadership that you need to take yourself to the next level. If your business is only doing $500,000 a year, you can only afford 2 or 3 employees, and you can't afford to pay them much. So therefore, your team isn't going to be that skilled, right? If you're doing $5, $10, $15, $50 million a year, oh God, you can all of a sudden, you can afford a whole different caliber of talent on your team, right? And that talent is going to reflect in even more freedom, more profits, and more growth for yourself and for the entity that you're building, right? So first decide what is your one thing right now, and then focus on one thing thinking to solve that one thing. Before you move on to anything else, once you've identified what your top problem is, then decide on that as your one thing and do not move on to any other priorities until you've solved it, right? So let's talk about how to solve each of these problems. Well, the first problem is, I'm going to unpack, is the profit problem, okay? So the profit problem is actually one of the easiest ones to solve because in order to optimize for profits, all you have to do is make optimization decisions from a place of your existing revenues. So here's what I mean by that. In order to, have low profits, that means you must already have some revenues, right? And operating from a place of having revenue is always easier than operating from a place of not having revenue, right? So, some people say revenue solves all problems. I would augment that to say profitable revenue can solve all problems in your business, right? So the first thing to think through is, what are your requirements around profit, right? And one of the big trade-offs I've seen people make is the trade-off of growth for less profit, right? So what happens when you make this trade-off is you get sloppy, right? And I know I fell into this trap, but once you land on a growth model for your business and you start seeing a path to growing your business, most entrepreneurs get sloppy, right? Because the increases in revenue kind of disguise your profit problems. You can always kind of sell your way out of running out of money once you've figured out how to sell your products and services to people. And the biggest commitment I see entrepreneurs not make is the commitment that I am going to profit and I'm going to grow, right? And I'm not going to compromise on one of these two. And it is possible, where focus goes, energy flows, right? If I focus on, I'm going to increase my profits and I'm going to grow, and I'm going to do both of these and not compromise on each other, and that's my focus, then I'm going to make more smart decisions. I'm not going to shoot from the hip. I'm not going to, make excuses that, we're not making any money because we're growing. A lot of that is sloppiness, right? You get what you tolerate. And if your mindset is that, if your mindset is, it's all good, we're growing, yes, that's fine if it's conscious. It's fine to lose money if it's part of a conscious plan. There's many software companies that have scaled over the history of time that have become multi-billion-dollar entities that did it by losing money for a sustained period of time. But oftentimes, these companies that have these big successes after losing money, they did it to a plan. They consciously lost money. They didn't lose money from a perspective of victimhood, like, a reactive kind of viewpoint that I'll just figure it out later at the end of the month. Maybe I'll run out of money this month, maybe not. Maybe we'll lose money again this month. But then, this fantasy isle belief pops. In just a couple months, we'll make more sales and we'll be able to dig ourselves out of this profit hole. Bullshit, right? So don't tolerate this weakness in your mind, and then you will not tolerate this weakness in your business. So demand growth and profit. Increasing average transaction value. This is so critical, right? The average amount of revenue that you generate per client is one of the most important levers of profits. So if one business is generating, $5,000 in revenue per client, and another company is generating $50,000 in revenue per client, most times the company that's doing $50K per client is going to be more profitable for most small businesses. Now, I understand, a contractor, like a contractor, for example, has a ton of pass-through expenses like lumber and materials and stuff like that. So not all dollars of revenue are created equal. So what I would say is the way to look at this is actually gross profit per sale, right? So instead of just saying, average transaction value, I want you to say average gross profit transaction value, right? So for example, let's say a contractor who sells a $50,000 kitchen remodel, right? The expenses on that kitchen are $45,000. So they collected $50,000 from their client, and the expenses were $45,000, right? That means that kitchen remodeling contractor only has $5,000 in gross profit per client, meaning, revenue minus the expenses of delivering on that revenue, right? I always say if I ran an apple stand, okay, and I sell apples for $1 a piece, and the person I buy apples from sells apples to me for 80 cents a piece, then I have 20% gross profit, right? Okay, 20% gross profit is terrible. That is not sustainable in most businesses. So you want to get to at least, in a service-based business especially, 60% gross profit, right? So that means for every $10,000 of money I receive from a client, I only spend $4,000 of that on the expenses of delivering on that revenue for the client. That's 60% gross profit, okay? So if that kitchen remodeling contractor's gross profit is $5,000 and, someone else sells consulting services for $5,000 per transaction and it's 100% gross profit, right? Then technically the gross profit per sale is equal in these two businesses. So you really want to optimize your business from gross profit per sale perspective, right? And the business that has the higher average gross profit per sale is going to typically have less profit problems, right? Now, this is all things being equal, right? Let's say that consulting business that sells $5,000 consulting services per client, let's say that $5,000 fee is 100% profit because the owner is the consultant. Well, then we're going into a freedom problem there. That means you have owner-dependent profits, right? So I'll go into freedom next, But I just want you to understand that there are trade-offs here, right? Sometimes the things that are really high in gross profit, if they involve the owner's time, they're not necessarily worth it. That's why 60% gross profit is a good ballpark kind of goal to set for yourself, because it means that you can use the revenues from your clients to hire additional people to do the work so that the owner isn't the one doing all the work. So you've got to solve gross profit per client, right? Another thing, if profits are low in your business, so the first place I would always look is gross profits, right? The other thing is just general overstaffing, right? We typically say that per unit of revenue, a business should spend no greater than 40% per unit of revenue on staffing expenses, right? So what I mean by that is, if your business does $1 million a year, your business should not be spending more than $400,000 a year on total salaries and employee compensation, right? So again, if your business is making $1 million a year, you shouldn't be spending more than $400,000 a year on salaries, payroll, any variable compensation like commissions, etc., right? Now, once you learn how to hire to scale your business and delegate yourself out of a job, which is a good thing, oftentimes your business is going to be closer, especially in a service business, going to be closer to that 60% labor cost, right? When you're at 60% labor cost, most times you're overstaffed, right? So the only way to fix overstaffing is to either sell more products and services, increase your revenues without hiring. So do a hiring freeze and then sell more revenue, right? So that the top line increases while the labor expense stays the same. Or obviously a layoff of sorts, right? Where you choose a section of your business that's maybe unprofitable, et cetera, and then you actually cut that part of your business without increasing revenues. Obviously, a combination of the two is usually the most effective, some expense optimization and some revenue optimization. But you've got to solve overstaffing. Another thing on solving your gross profit problem is killing unprofitable client and service types, right? So in every business, you're going to have profitable services and you're going to have unprofitable services, right? And you want to look at this from a gross profit perspective, right? So again, if I sell red apples for $1 each and my vendor charges me 80 cents per red apple, and then I also sell green apples for $1 each, and the green apples are sold to me for 40 cents each, that means my green apples have a 20% gross profit. My red apples have a 20% gross profit and my green apples have a 60% gross profit, right? So by just killing the product of red apples in my business, I am able to immediately take my profits and skyrocket them, So by killing the unprofitable services that you provide in your business, that is an immediate profit lever, right? But when you do that, you also need to be able to increase the sales of the product, the new product that you're going to be going all in on. You have to be able to increase the sales of that product, because now you're not going to be able to sell the other underperforming product. Remember this, most people call it a loss leader. When they have something in their business that loses them money but leads to future results, they call that a loss leader. I don't call it a loss leader. I call it a loss loser, right? Because in 90% of cases, the thing you've convinced yourself is a loss leader is really just emotional weakness for you as the owner of the company to cut that part of the business, right? So you call it a loss leader, right? And the truth is you don't have math to back up why it's a loss leader. I'm all game for you to have a loss leader in your business. The problem is most of them are loss losers. A loss leader to me is I can prove that even though I only make 20% gross profit on this service, I can prove that it results in an average of 4 clients for me down the line, right? Okay, great. If those 4 clients that the loss leader gives you are proven and mathematically predictable for your business, then you should keep offering the loss leader service. But if you can't prove that the loss leader tangibly and predictably leads to additional revenue and high profit revenue sources for the business, you should kill it. Now, I'm talking a lot about gross profit, and this is a big difference than net profit. So net profit is everything, all, gross profit is the cost to deliver a service, right? So if I'm a contractor and my labor expenses, my material expenses are $45,000 for every 50,000 I receive, I am at a 90% expense ratio, and therefore I'm at a 10% gross profit. That is unsustainable because low gross profit businesses paralyze themselves to spend money on sales and marketing and spend money on overhead to be able to hire a powerful executive team, which is usually labeled as an operating expense, not a gross profit expense. I'll give you an example. Our company has been one of the top 1,000 fastest growing businesses in the United States 3 years in a row, according to Inc. 5000. We just got notified we've made the list the 4th year in a row now. And in the process of building this company, we have spent an average of 29% of our top line revenues on our sales and marketing to promote our products and services, right? Now, some of that's value-based marketing, like our book. Some of that is educational marketing, like our webinars and our 3-day boot camps that we do and all that stuff. But the point is, I'm spending 29% on just sales and marketing. We're spending another about 15 to 20% of our top line revenues on our operating expenses, a large portion of which is our executive team salaries, right? Which is millions of dollars to have the powerful executive team that we currently have in our business. That costs us millions of dollars a year to have that executive team. So that's another, call it 15%. You call it 15 plus 29%. That brings us to 45. Call it 45%. So just our sales and marketing, call it 30%, right, on sales and marketing, and 15% on our OpEx. 30 plus 15 is 45%, right? So literally, if I was operating, so 45% of my top line revenues are going towards those two categories. So let me break this down and make it simple. If my business was doing $1 million a year, $450,000 per year is being spent on sales and marketing and operating expenses. Okay. If my gross profit was 45%, right, then that would mean for every unit of revenue, I am spending $65,000. For every $100,000 in revenue, I'm spending $65,000. For $1 million in revenue, I'm spending $650,000. So look at it like this. $1 million in revenue minus $650,000. That's 45% gross profit, right? So I'm talking about $650,000 would be your cost of goods sold or cost of sales, right? So that brings us to, $450,000 left over, and then I'm spending $450,000 on sales and marketing, which means my company is profiting $0, right? So with that being said, like if my company wasn't, at a 60% or higher gross profit, which it is, I wouldn't be profiting anything with what we're spending on sales and marketing. So my point in sharing this is if you don't solve gross profit, you will not have money to spend on sales and marketing to scale your business. You will not have money to spend on a leadership team to help grow and expand and scale your business, right? So gross profit is where your revenue, solving gross profit is where you get the money to invest in all the things that give you growth. So if your company is not gross profitable, you will never have the money to scale your business, basically, is what I'm saying. So you have to solve gross profit in order to deserve to have the money to scale. So, and one way you do that is by killing unprofitable services that you offer. Okay, and the last thing I want to share on how to optimize your profits, if this is your top problem, is you have to run on a clear financial plan, right? This sounds so stupid, but our lives changed financially as running this company when we started running by what's called a driver model, which we call it internally. The driver model is basically a whole array of inputs that produce a financial output, right? So, it's basically math formulas that determine, like, if we get 100 leads in a month, how many of those 100 leads will turn into signed clients? What's the average revenue per client? What's the average profit per client? And it all plugs into an Excel, Google Sheets spreadsheet that we've built. And what this allows us to do is to bridge the gap between our client acquisition strategy, our expenses, so that every single month we know in advance how much money we're going to make, what our expenses are going to be, and most importantly, what our profits are going to be. And having that be proactive rather than reactive is probably one of the most liberating things you could ever do to optimize your profits. So if you're not creating a strategic plan for your business, if you've never done financial statement analysis for your business, that's why we rolled out a fractional CFO solution. So, if it's very critical to have an expert kind of hold your hand through this process of optimizing your profits. And that's why our fractional CFO business is literally like gold for our clients, because it solves that problem and it helps you create that financial plan and do all of these analyses on your financial statements so that you can make the right decisions. If you want information on fractional CFO, you can just shoot me a personal email and I'll make sure it gets to one of our CFOs. And if you're doing over $1 million in revenue, I can actually hook you up with a free one-on-one with one of the CFOs. But regardless, even if you're just interested in not doing $1 million, feel free to email me, bill@smbteam.com. So the second thing I want to go through is how to solve your freedom problem. Okay, so we talked about how to solve your profit problem. Now I'm going to talk about how to solve your freedom problem. So let's say you actually have profits, right? At least somewhat. Well, if you have owner-dependent profits, then you don't have freedom, right? So we've got to eject yourself from the business. One of the number one reasons a business owner never ejects themselves from the business is a lack of a scalable, productive, effective recruiting process, right? So this actually lack of a scalable recruiting process is probably the reason that you accept drama creators on your team and you don't fire them. It's probably the reason that you don't think there's anyone else out there that's better than you. It's quite frankly because you can't attract great people to your business. If you were effortlessly attracting great people to your business, you would very quickly understand you are not the best person to be doing all the work for your business, right? There are people who are doing rocket engineering, right? That literally they can do that job better than anyone else in the world, right? And it makes sense because you're probably not a rocket engineer. And I want you to look at when you hire someone to replace yourself, you're just hiring a rocket engineer in your trade, in your business line, right? But the point of me sharing that is there are extremely, extremely talented people on planet Earth. The question is whether or not you are attracting them so that you can actually see yourself being replaced. So a scalable recruiting process is probably one of the most mission critical elements to removing yourself from the day-to-day of your business. Another mission critical element to removing yourself from the day-to-day of your business is creating your not to-do list, right? It really comes down to a list of never agains, right? When you tell yourself never again, I am never going to be doing X, Y, or Z in my business ever again, right? When you give yourself that declaration, right? What it does is it frees you up to create a plan to determine what the deadline will be of when you are no longer doing something. It gives you time to find your replacement in the business, right? So, for example, let's say a big thing that entrepreneurs have a struggle with is being involved in their sales process, right? When you're involved in your sales process, you don't have any freedom because you're basically just a reactive worker for whenever a lead comes in or someone's interested in your services, right? So a declaration, a not to-do list item that would need to be created with a deadline would be, by X date, I am no longer doing any sales for my business, right? So by making that not to-do list commitment, you are able to then, kind of usher resources and hire the right people and create templates and scripts and things to replace yourself in the sales process relatively quickly, right? And the truth is this, now knowing that I have, a sales team that brings in millions of dollars of revenue, like I thought I was the best at sales, and I was pretty good at sales. I mean, when I was at yellowpages.com, I was number 1 in President's Club. And so I definitely had a gift for sales. But there are people on my sales team who are way better than I am at sales. And that's because we created coaching and training and best practices, and we created a unique offer, and also they're more talented and more sustainable in the role of sales. There's a reason I only lasted 18 months in sales. It's because I wasn't really cut out for it long term. So, whereas there was a point in time where I thought there was no way I would ever remove myself from sales. Now I am removed from sales, and there are people on my team who are better than me at sales. So my reminder to myself is always that anytime I think that someone can't do something better than me, I'm wrong, right? Because as a business owner, it's not about me being the best at anything in the business. It's about me being the best at finding people who are the best at every part of my business, right? That's the shift. So if there's one skill I have to learn as CEO, we have to learn as entrepreneurs, is it's our job to find the best people to do the job in front of us to replace ourselves, right? And if you can't, then you can't be a great head coach. I mean, imagine a head coach of a sports team playing every single role on the sports team. You'd never see it. Their job is to find great people and then bring out the best in those people through training, motivation, team meetings, etc., right? And make sure that the vision is clear, the alignment's there, right? That's your goal as an entrepreneur. So that is one of the most important pillars, is knowing how to create that not to-do list, right? And another area of not to-do list is client work, right? Is like when you're doing the individual work for clients, the two main areas you have to remove yourself and create that not to-do list is in client work and in your sales process. And if you can remove yourself from any piece of client work, any piece of the sales process, you are on your way to creating that freedom and building a real business, right? But understand the trade-offs here. Replacing yourself requires money. So this is why sometimes people over-delegate, right? They give up too many tasks on their plate too early, hire people, before they have the finances to. And sometimes they'll, entrepreneurs who figure out the freedom thing, they'll actually delegate themselves out of a job, which is a good thing because that means the business isn't dependent on you. But then they'll run out of money in the process. And now that brings you back to solving profits as a problem, right? Which is why you really dance between solving one of these three areas as you scale your business. So another thing is to understand, if you want freedom, another big pillar of freedom is to understand that you need a formal list of everyone in the company and their roles and responsibilities, right? And you have to put all this into an organizational chart, right? And the book Traction has some good concepts on this. Our book has some good concepts on this. But what I'm sharing here is not like new information. It's just something you haven't yet done, right? Or maybe you have done an organizational chart, but you're not actually living by it, right? Because one of the most important things as kind of the reverse of you creating a not to-do list is you creating your to-do list, right? And that's going to be within your responsibilities, right? Like I said, role and responsibilities for every member in the company. So if you are the CEO of your business, that is your role. What are the responsibilities of a CEO? Well, the responsibilities is vision setting, goal setting, sales, big picture sales and marketing strategy, managerial finance, big picture brand expansion strategies. Managerial finance, is making decisions from financial statements for the future betterment of the company. So those are the responsibilities of a CEO. Those are your working on the business tasks, like managing the executive team, etc. And what you'll notice very quickly once you've identified your role as a CEO is you'll look at your calendar, you'll compare it to your role as CEO, and you'll very quickly see that your responsibilities as CEO are things you're not spending time on throughout the week. So therefore, you are not CEO of your business, right? And when you're not working on your business, you're working in your business. And when you're working in your business, you're being an employee. So stop calling yourself a CEO. Just call yourself a worker bee employee of yourself and call it like it is and piss yourself off and get yourself motivated to change that. But the bottom line is if you're not spending time on the areas in which CEOs spend time, then you are being a worker bee within your own business machine, which means you created a job for yourself, right? So once you're clear on what your role and your responsibilities are as part of that role, everything outside of your responsibilities of your role has to be delegated to someone else, right? So maybe you create a list of 5 to 10 big picture items that are your responsibilities. Everything out of those 5 to 10, someone else on your team must do. So the question is, do you want pain now or pain later, right? Yeah, it's going to be hard. Let's say you're doing 5 things every week, like meeting with clients one-on-one or doing individual client work every week or doing individual sales, calls every week. Let's say you're spending some of your time doing that. Well, to eject yourself from those things, you're going to have to train someone else on it. You're going to have to systemize it, right? That's going to be painful. The person you train might quit. The person you train may not have been the right selection from the outset. The question is this: are you willing to go through that initial pain now of training someone, getting someone else up to speed to do what you do great? Or would you rather have permanent pain? Would you rather have permanent pain, or would you rather go through the temporary pain of training someone else on how to replace yourself in these functions? Because it's going to be pain either way. If you avoid this, training someone else, finding someone else to do your job, okay, you'll avoid pain in the current, but you'll just set yourself up for perpetual pain and never being able to eject yourself or remove yourself from the day-to-day of your business. So ask yourself, what pain do you want? Do you want pain now, or do you want pain forever, right? So formal leadership, executive kind of organizational chart, and included within that, you need a leadership team, right? So a leadership team are the direct reports to the CEO in most businesses, right? Now, in larger businesses, this becomes the executive team, right? But the leadership and or executive team are the people that report to the CEO, right? In businesses that are service businesses, your people are your number one asset, right? So the number one way to multiply yourself is to have a multiplier executive or leadership team, the people who report to you. So the functions within this are your head of revenue, which within that is your head of marketing, your head of sales, right? That's your head of revenue bucket. Then the next bucket you have is your head of operations. Now, within operations, you have general business operations. That would be more of like a COO role. And then you have your service-specific operations, right? So, this could be, if you're like a law firm, for example, that would be like a chief legal officer, right? If you're a contractor, it would be the person in charge of the quality assurance of the contractor operations, right? The person in charge of making sure the ships run on time for the delivery of the work. Whereas a COO is more of a general business operations role who has some input over your sales operations, your delivery operations, your finance operations, right? So that's kind of your operations bucket. And then you have your finance and HR bucket, which is either going to be a CFO, director of HR, etc., right? So culmination of these people, let's say a head of marketing, head of sales, head of service, and COO, these 4 people, and then maybe a head of finance and HR, these 4 or 5 people are what's called a leadership team. In most businesses, the owner is the leadership team, but they've never really divested themselves from each of these roles that they play, and therefore they don't have a leadership team, right? So probably the number one way of getting freedom across everything I've shared is just have an amazingly talented leadership team. The only way you afford a leadership team is if you have the profits to afford a leadership team. So you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place where it's like, if I don't have the profits, well, part of the reason is you don't have the right executive team, right? And because you don't have the profits, you can't hire the right executive team. So I do think that the first problem you need to solve is you need enough profits to hire an executive team. And this starts showing you kind of a little flash preview on the surface of the fact that making more money gives you the resources to have more freedom. So these things are hand in hand, but you have to use the money that you make to hire a world-class executive team in order to reap that benefit. You can't just like sit on the money and put it in a treasure chest and never touch it. You have to use the money to hire these excellent people. But let me ask you this. Let's say you hire these excellent people to be in charge of every function of your business, and it removes you entirely from the day-to-day of your business, right? And let's say that brings your profits from $1 million a year to $800,000 a year, right? Well, would you rather profit $1 million a year and have to work 16-hour days to produce that profit? Or if you had an amazing executive team and you profited $800,000 a year, right? Let's say that the expenses outweighed the additions to revenue that the executive team brought just a bit, right? So you brought this amazing executive team in, they helped grow your revenues a little bit, but it's a net difference of $200K less in profit. So instead you profit $800,000. Would you rather have profited $800,000 and you only have to work 1 hour a day instead of 16 hours a day? Well, yeah, technically your hourly rate is exponentially higher as a business owner if you only have to work 1 hour a day to produce $800,000 a year in profit versus alternate version of you who has to work 16 hours a day to get $1 million in profit. Is it really worth an extra $200,000 a year in profit? No, absolutely not. So optimizing for freedom and profit combined can be one of the most important decisions you ever make. So that's how to solve your profit problems. That's how to solve your freedom problems. And now I want to go, last but not least, how to solve your growth problems, right? So I already talked briefly about this. Like, again, if you've already figured out growth, right, then you're either going to have a profit or a freedom problem. But until you have figured out top line revenue growth, you don't have the luxury of solving your profit or your freedom problem. For example, like if you're only doing $1 in revenue, there is no profit optimizations you could possibly make if you're only making $1 in revenue. Okay? If you're only making $1 in revenue, there are no freedom optimizations you can make, right? Because you don't have the money to hire anyone, right, to replace yourself. So growth at a certain level, it's kind of like they've done studies where it's like if you make over like $200,000 a year, your life doesn't get any happier or something like that. That same thing happens in business, right? Where it's like growth is the most important thing until it isn't anymore, right? And so if you haven't figured out how to grow your business to a sustainable level that gives you the amount of excess profit and personal free time that you need, then you probably have a growth problem. And here's the real kind of pain point for business owners, and they don't realize this until they go to get their sell their business or transact with their business in some sorts. A business that is not growing is going to be worth much less than a business that is growing. So your best bet is to crack the growth code and crack the profit code, because the more you're growing, the more of a multiple that you're going to get on the enterprise value of your business. And the more you're profiting, the higher the dollar amount that multiple is applied to calculate the enterprise value of your business. So what's really important when it comes to growth is making sure that you have a proprietary client getting system, right? And growth is so mission critical, and yet so many business owners completely mentally abandon their growth plan, right? So what they do when you mentally abandon your growth plan is you bank all of your success on external vendors, right? So you say, oh, I hired a new marketing vendor. They're going to figure out my growth plan for me. Bullshit, okay? Like, if you are CEO, if you are the leader of your life and of your business, yes, you use vendors to help you on your path to success. That's great, right? Now, I'm saying this as a company that provides marketing services, but way more important than the vendor that you select is the fact that you have a differentiated value proposition, a differentiated approach to generating clients, especially from both perspectives, from the sales and the marketing side perspective, right? So, for example, we had a client who worked with us in the past, and this was a divorce lawyer, and this person came to us and said, I want to specialize in fathers' rights divorce law, right? And here's why. There's a pocket of opportunity in my market for this. These are the zip codes I want to target for it because of household income data that I looked into. Here is the target avatar of who I want to target, and here's the sales process we're going to bring them through, right? Now, create me a Google and Facebook advertising strategy that fills my funnel within these parameters, right? And, when we had a client like this tell us this, it was so easy to work with this client because they knew what they wanted, right? And they didn't bank all of their success on a vendor. So if I were to compare this to 90%, 95% of clients that we work with, most of them, when they sign up for marketing services, they cross their arms, they sit back and they go, what can you do for me today? What works? I'll do whatever you tell me works, right? They're almost coming from a place of victimhood where it's like they have no control over their destiny. So therefore, they're just going to let us tell them exactly what works, right? And it has to be a dance. Like, yeah, definitely we need to learn from vendors who have a bunch of experience and have been there, done that. At the same time, we got to make our own decisions. I've never met a high 8-figure or 9-figure owner of a business that was not obsessed with sales and marketing, especially with their own sales and marketing plan. Why? Because there's no way you get to high 8 to 9 figures in revenue if you're not obsessed about revenue growth. It's just the owner's blind spots become the company's blind spots, right? So while you're not the one doing it, when you're the owner of the business, you must understand it, right? You must understand your sales and marketing strategy. So one book that really encapsulates this for me is what I call, not what I call it, the book is called Blue Ocean Strategy. And Blue Ocean Strategy kind of breaks down how to blue ocean the positioning of your business so that you appear as though you are the choice in your market rather than a choice in your market. And what blue oceaning to me means is you kind of blue ocean your offer so that you're not competing in what they call the red ocean. The red ocean is a mature, heavily saturated market, right? So, an example of a heavily saturated market would be, IT companies, right? There are thousands and thousands and thousands of IT companies, right? And there's no real differentiation. It's just, when there's limited differentiation and it's a red ocean means there's blood in the water, there's sharks everywhere, there's a ton of competition. That's what red ocean means. So if you look at an industry like IT companies, it'll fall within that bucket. If you look at an industry like at one point in time, taxis, right? Taxi companies were a dime a dozen, right? The only thing you can compete on is convenience and price, right? And then comes along Uber, right? A whole new blue ocean way of getting a taxi, quote unquote, right? So because Uber had a blue ocean offer and all the other taxi companies just had a red ocean offer in a highly competitive, fragmented market, Uber took over and then, got duplicated by Lyft. And now, the primary way that we get taxis is through our mobile phone, right? So just, your blue ocean strategy is a mix of your proprietary product combined with your proprietary sales and marketing strategy. So if there's any way that you can differentiate your product, it's one of the best sales and marketing tools you could ever do. As they say, the best products are the best sales and marketing engines, right? This is why Tesla has had to spend almost no money on marketing, because they built a truly unique product at a price point that's very hard to compete with. So the best product promoted in the best way will typically win the blue ocean argument. Now, the best product not promoted, right, in most cases for small businesses, especially service-based businesses, it ain't going to go nowhere, because the world is flooded with great service providers that nobody knows about. And you don't want to be somebody that's great at what they do but doesn't get paid commensurate to how great they are. And that's why you need a great product, blue ocean, preferably something differentiated that feels like a new category of product that no one else has offered before, and simultaneously a blue ocean sales and marketing strategy, a unique way of getting your product out there. For example, with us, like, I have nothing to fear when it comes to our growth strategy, because we have such a blue ocean sales and marketing strategy that it's almost impossible for anyone to compete with us. We've written the #1 book ever in our industry. We hold the biggest virtual events in our industry that provide more value than any other lead magnet provided by anyone else in our industry, arguably combined, in terms of life-changing value that we provide. We have hundreds of lead magnets that change people's lives. We have a scalable webinar process. We have a scalable, this podcast. So many different kind of hooks in the water that allow us to truly differentiate our strategy, so that when we do run Facebook or Google ads for our business, since we've already been everywhere online, most of the stuff we do works because we're so omnipresent and we're showing up everywhere. So that's the place you want to be when it comes to your growth plan. And you can have a blue ocean marketing and product strategy, but in most businesses, if your sales process is broken, your sales process is what controls your cash flow. Nobody pulls out their credit card, nobody pays you, then you don't have a business, right? So your sales process is the true cash flow generator of your entire business. So if you're looking at, like, what are the things you want to do to have a predictable growth strategy, number 1 is I need a blue ocean product. Number 2, I need a blue ocean marketing strategy. And number 3 is I need a bulletproof sales process to turn people who are interested into customers and clients in my business, right? So if you can figure out these principles, how to solve for your freedom, how to solve for your profits, how to solve for your growth, you can become an expert entrepreneur instead of a beginner or an amateur entrepreneur. And even just solving one of these will put you on the path to success, because once you solve one of them, you typically either get the time or the resources to go and solve the next one. So for example, if you solve your profit problem, you then have more money to spend on increasing your profits, increasing your marketing spend on your most profitable sources, right? If you solve your growth problem, right, then you have more top line revenue to go and hire great people to replace yourself, right? So these areas kind of tie together, and once you solve one area, it gives you the resources, the time, or the money to go and solve another one of the 3 areas. So always remember and choose your one thing. I'm either solving a growth problem, a profit problem, or a freedom problem. And I think this will help your growth trajectory in business tremendously if you can just practice these 3 pillars, master these 3 pillars, and make all of your decisions from these 3 pillars. So I hope you got value from this episode, and I will see you in the next episode of the Bill Hauser Show. Peace out. If you found value in this podcast, here's one way I can help your firm right now. First, you can get our new book, Law Firm Growth Accelerator. It's everything we've learned over 10 plus years helping lawyers build thriving, profitable firms. The strategies that you'll get in this book work for any practice area and any revenue level. You can get the audiobook and ebook 100% free, or just cover the shipping and we'll send you the physical copy to you in addition to the audio and ebook. Go to smbteam.com/book to get your copy.